Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daisy Cousens Show. I'm Daisy Cousens, and I'm thrilled to be right here on ADH TV 3 times a week, and we have a terrific show for you tonight. This week, we have Shadow Minister for the Environment, Senator Jonathon Duniam, to talk to us about Federal Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek's shameful foot-dragging as she leaves the fate of communities reliant on salmon farming in Tasmania dangling in the balance. And we will also speak to the Director of Catholic Education for the Archdiocese of Canberra and Goulburn, Ross Fox, about how a return to old school learning has dramatically improved school results for a handful of Catholic schools who are ditching Australia's modern and increasingly ineffective approach to education. But first, what emerged as a bit of an unexpected election issue in the United States of America, that is, the issue of, amongst other things, gender-affirming care like puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy being offered to minors who believe they have been born in the wrong body, will take centre stage today as the US Supreme Court hears arguments in the case US v. Scometti. This case, which was brought by the Biden administration on behalf of families of minors who identify as the opposite sex, in response to the state of Tennessee's recent ban on puberty blockers and hormone therapy for minors, and enacts civil penalties for doctors who violate this new law. The law, of course, was implemented last year. Now, the case challenges the constitutionality of this Tennessee law, and the outcome could determine whether or not US states can ban certain forms of transition drugs for teenagers and children. Now, we should not be shocked that this is a case the Biden administration should bring. I mean, Joe Biden has been such a terrible president. We should expect him to go out with something as appalling as condoning the drugging and sometimes surgical mutilation of people who are under 18, who may simply be suffering the usual discomfort that teenagers feel with their changing bodies. And the outcome is indeed consequential. If Tennessee law is upheld, it will affirm similar bans that have been implemented in many other states and greenlight further states to take action to protect children and teens who have been exposed to an ideology that seeks to use them as medical experiments. But if the government wins, if the Biden administration wins, it will effectively nullify the existing bans and greenlight the push from the trans, legal and political lobby to permanently medicalize mentally ill minors before they are anywhere near old enough to understand the potential consequences of undergoing this kind of medical treatment. So needless to say, the case is kind of a big deal. And the reason I bring it up is because the lawyer for the Biden administration, a trans man, so a female who identifies as a male, named Chase Strangio, did an interview on CNN this week to explain the case. And the interview was indeed revealing of the mindset of people who think it is appropriate to push this ideology onto teenagers and children. Here is the justification Strangio gives for opposing the Tennessee law.
So before the court tomorrow, the question is really a simple one as I see it. This is a law that bans medical treatment only when it is prescribed inconsistent with an individual's sex. Our argument is that that treats people differently because of their sex, and therefore the court has to treat it like all other forms of sex discrimination, and that's why it's unconstitutional.
Interesting justification about sex discrimination, all right, but a dangerous one for women's rights, however, as the state of Tennessee has pointed out.
Attorneys representing the state of Tennessee told the U.S. Supreme Court, quote, if the government's theory holds, men who identify as women could claim constitutionally based access to women's bathrooms, women's locker rooms, and women's sports. Accepting that theory would perversely erode women's rights and jeopardize landmark statutes protecting women's equal access to schools, winners' podiums, and beyond. What's your response to that?
Well, I obviously disagree with that premise that allowing transgender women into women's sports or women's bathroom is a threat to women, but it is also not the question before the court in this case. And in fact, it is a totally independent question about whether a law that bans medical care for transgender adolescents discriminates against people based on sex versus these separate cases that preceded any of these healthcare bans will continue to be litigated in the courts regardless of the outcome here.
Separate question or not, the attorneys for Tennessee are correct that this could set a precedent to allow males who identify as women to have access to women's spaces, sports, etc. constitutionally, an issue that trans rights activists remain frustratingly resistant to. In fact, you can see in Strangio's spiel there the willful ignorance that the threat is not from people with gender dysphoria, actually. It's from unscrupulous male predators who exploit self-identification laws in order to enter women's spaces for perverse reasons. Again, an issue that trans activists remain frustratingly resistant to. But it was Strangio's answer to the next question that was truly revealing of the cognitive dissonance of the trans lobby.
What do you say to physicians who are sensitive and supportive of trans kids, obviously don't want suicidal ideation, et cetera, but wonder if there is enough data as of now to prove that it is beneficial to allow these sort of treatments before the age of 18?
So I would say three things. And the first is we have decades of both clinical experience and research data showing that this is medical treatment that provides critical benefits to adolescents who need it. And so this is not new. This is not new medication. And so we have that information. We have long-term studies that track people for 5-6 years.
5 or 6 years? Sorry, but when it comes to the radical impact this kind of medication can have on the physical and mental well-being of those who take it, 5 or 6 years of follow-up would hardly seem anywhere near enough time to adequately ascertain whether or not transitioning is beneficial over the course of a lifetime, which, remember, is how long this kind of treatment can affect people. Not so great if you decide when you're a 15-year-old girl that you want to take testosterone, which radically changes you physically and permanently deepens your voice, and then realize when you're 25 that, oh, actually, you were just depressed and hating puberty, right? But it didn't stop there.
Nobody has to provide this medication to adolescents. These are not doctors being forced to provide this medication. These are doctors who are wanting to treat their patients in the best way that they know how, based on the best available evidence to us. And these are young people who may have known since they were 2 years old exactly who they are, who suffered for 6-7 years before they had any relief.
So this person believes that a 2-year-old has a sophisticated enough concept of the self to realize that not only are they actually a member of the opposite gender that has simply been born in the wrong body, but that they need to physically alter themselves in order to live a happy and productive life. I mean, for goodness sake, some 2-year-olds can't even talk, let alone have that kind of self-awareness. And yet here is this lawyer, Chase Strangio, trying to put a reasonable face on what is ultimately an extreme ideology, proposing extreme medical treatments for people that we don't entrust to drive a car or vote. And the thing is, Strangio is actually behind the 8 ball on this one. The UK and Europe, who used to be incredibly gung-ho about transitioning minors, have in recent years dramatically stepped back from this position, which the interviewer, Jake Tapper, pointed out.
Earlier this year, England's National Health Service stopped prescribing puberty blockers for children with gender dysphoria, claiming that there's, quote, not enough evidence to support the safety or clinical effectiveness. It does seem as though, whereas Europe used to be more progressive on these issues, they're dialing it back now.
Unfortunately, the USA, and indeed Australia, it must be said, remain utterly captured by this ideology and remain stoically on board with the affirmative method of handling minors who believe they are trans. Let's hope with President Donald Trump soon to be back in the White House that the USA at large wakes up to the exploitative nature of trans medicine for minors and follows the UK and Europe into saner territory. Welcome back to the show. Well, Federal Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek is not ingratiating herself to the good people of Tasmania right now, digging her heels in on 2 industries based on supposed environmental concerns. On the one hand, the salmon industry in the great state of Tasmania could be in jeopardy as the community waits with bated breath for Plibersek's decision on whether salmon farms can continue to exist in Macquarie Harbour after a review suggested that waste and oxygen depletion linked to salmon farms was having a catastrophic impact on the endangered Maugean skate, which is a type of fish. On the other hand, she's dragging her feet on okaying a new tailings dam for a hugely important mine. So why all this umming and ahhing from Plibersek when people's livelihoods are very much at stake? Well, joining me to discuss is Shadow Minister for the Environment, Fisheries and Forestry, Senator Jonathon Duniam. Senator, thank you so much for being here today. Now, look, could Tanya Plibersek really have the audacity to shut down salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour because of this endangered skate?
Well, Daisy, it's good to be with you. And frankly, yes, Tanya Plibersek could have the audacity to destroy the livelihoods of the hundreds of workers in the community of Strawn who depend on the salmon industry. I mean, she's had the audacity to leave them waiting for now 2 Christmases to understand whether they'd have job certainty, and she has no sign of actually making a decision. There are people calling on her to do the right thing, even from her own political party. Her own Prime Minister has been publicly calling on her in a gentle way to make a decision on this issue. But I tell you what, desperation knows no bounds when you're a minister in an inner city Sydney seat and you've got the Greens nipping at your heels electorally, and your portfolio happens to be the environment. And so she's in a very, very invidious position here because she doesn't want to annoy the Green voters who traditionally give her a top billing on their ballot paper. But by the same token, she doesn't want to annoy the voters of Braddon, a seat they need to win where these salmon farms are.
Yes, it seems an awfully odd portfolio to give her, considering where she's situated. I didn't quite know what Albo was thinking with that. But look, it's been actually reported that water conditions in Macquarie Harbour, they're actually at decade highs. And in fact, the population of the skate is continuing to improve. It doesn't seem to be the dire situation that's been presented, at least not at the moment. So do you think maybe this hand-wringing from Tanya Plibersek is about more than just saving this species? Is there a political motive there, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it does come down to exactly that, Daisy. It's all about politics. Let's not forget, so these permits to allow salmon farming to occur in Macquarie Harbour have been in place for more than 10 years, 12 years now. The people seeking the review are the Bob Brown Foundation, no friend of any industry whatsoever, the Australia Institute, not really friendly toward any sort of industry, and of course the Labor taxpayer-funded EDO, which is fundamentally anti-jobs and anti-industry. So you've got to understand where this all came from, what catalysed this review, but the minister's going along with it. So she could make a decision, she's choosing not to, and as a result we have this huge degree of uncertainty. I might just go back to the point you made around water quality. So there have been a range of surveys done about the population of the skate. We've got, and that's showing an increasing population. The captive breeding program is going exceptionally well. We've got tens of babies being born now at the captive breeding facility here in Hobart. The other thing that isn't taken into account is the fact that the Magean skate, this endangered species of fish which looks like a stingray, used to exist in a body of water called Bathurst Harbour, which is just down on the southwest coast of Tasmania, and they no longer exist there. They're extinct in that body of water. There has never been a single salmon pen in that harbour at all. So to come along and blame salmon farming for the demise of the skate is short-sighted and driven by green ideological vote grabbing, which is where this minister's heart really is, I think.
Yes, it certainly seems political the more you hear about it. And speaking of politics, a poll that was obtained by The Australian showed actually that half of Tasmanians do not want Plibersek to stop the salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour. That's quite a large chunk, a good half. Do you think this issue, if she's not careful, could shape up to be an electoral problem for the federal government in Tasmania when we go to the polls next year?
I think this will be front and centre in this election campaign. If Tanya Plibersek does not make a decision before the election, and I highly doubt she will, given she's kicked the can down the road this far and has granted an extension to the Threatened Species Scientific Committee to examine the detail around the Magean skate and how endangered it really is, till October next year. So she, I suspect, is looking to push off a decision until that month next year, which is a long way away, and certainly after the election. This is an important industry in the electorate of Braddon. It's an important industry in the electorate of Lyons. Labor hold Lyons by a very slim margin. Now they've got a new candidate there, a much more high-profile one, which makes the battle a bit harder. And in Braddon, we've got a new candidate replacing Gavin Pearce. So we've got a fight on our hands there. But at the end of the day, the voters of Tasmania, like you've said in that poll, are not going to be interested in names on ballot papers. They're going to be interested in who actually stands up for the industries we need to make our economy tick over. Tasmanians sent Mark Latham a very strong message in 2004 when he tried to shut down our forestry industry from downtown Sydney, as he did, and they voted Labor out in the Tasmanian seats they held. The same will happen here if Tanya Plibersek does not read the tea leaves and understand we actually want jobs and a thriving economy. We don't need to rely on the mainland for our income, but I suspect she won't get that message, sadly.
Yes, it certainly seems that way. She seems very tone deaf to all of this. And look, you know, in another instance, as I mentioned, of Tanya Plibersek stalling a decision that has huge repercussions for the community, she's stalling a decision on a new tailings dam for a zinc, copper and lead mine. Now, this mine employs 600 people. That's a lot of jobs. And it's been waiting since 2022 for this decision. I mean, what is going on with this foot dragging from Plibersek? Is she using it to fight with Albo? Does she just hate her job? I mean, what do you think?
Well, they're brought to you by the minister who knocked a gold mine on the head because of a mythical bee in New South Wales. This is a minister who thinks that she needs all of this time to assess whether a tailings dam can commence construction for a mine that's been in operation for 150 years. This is not virgin, pristine wilderness that the Greens would have you believe it is. This is an area of our state that has been mined, forested, burnt out by Indigenous Australians as well, and they want to build a tailings dam there. And so for her to take this time to make this decision, jeopardising again 600 jobs, that's only a few kilometres up the road from the salmon farm we were talking about before, and that is a regionally dispersed and remote part of our state, means that, again, inner city Labor dictating to regional communities across our country, in this case Tasmania, whether their jobs are important or not. She should have made this decision, along with the salmon one, long ago, put us out of our misery and provided certainty for the future. But this party that claims to be the friend of the worker is anything but, and I'm sad to say I don't think they'll be making a decision on this one before the election either.
No, I would say not. And look, Senator, I'll ask you just before we go, you know, there's been reports, obviously, of a little feud between Anthony Albanese and Tanya Plibersek going on this week. We all know that she loved her education portfolio. She was stripped of that after the federal election in 2022 and relegated to this environmental portfolio. She's dragging her feet on things. Could it be, Senator, that she maybe just really doesn't like this gig and would probably prefer to be back in education?
I think you might be onto something there, Daisy. I mean, it's astounding that with regard to not only the approvals around these projects, but also the negotiations in the last 6 to 8 months around her new green bureaucracy, the federal EPA she wanted to establish on 2 occasions now. The Prime Minister intervened and undercut Tanya Plibersek. She'd been off negotiating with the Greens to try and stack up this new EPA. The Greens were asking for things like a climate trigger to be inserted into our federal environmental approval laws, which would mean we'd never see a mine, a gas project, probably no property developments, no high-rises, nothing like that ever built in Australia again, and a ban on native forestry. She was prepared to sign a bit of paper. Journalists and indeed, I guess, the PMO have also seen this draft agreement between the Greens and Labor. The PM on 2 occasions now had to rein in his minister he apparently has no control over. If he had his way, and it appears he never will, they would have approved the Blaney gold mine, they would have approved the salmon farms by now, they would have approved this Rosebery MMG mine on Tasmania's west coast as well. But he can't control his minister, and it comes back to that very point. This minister, Tanya Plibersek, backed Bill Shorten back in the day instead of Anthony Albanese, and he became leader. And so this is retribution, and it sounds like we're the ones, all Australians, that are going to pay the price because of their petty tiff.
Certainly seems like that. My goodness, I wish they would just sort it out. We've all got lives to live and jobs to hold down. It's ridiculous. Senator Jonathon Duniam, thank you so much for coming on the program to chat this through. All the best, and I hope we see you again soon.
Thanks, Daisy. Catch up soon.
You're watching The Daisy Cousens Show. Well, for years, Australians have deplored the shoddy standards of the school curriculum and education methods in our country. Student-directed learning and a vague curriculum have left exam results floundering, teachers without sufficient support, and an increasing number of school kids going through their school life as effectively illiterate. Until now. A return to the old school teaching style of direct instruction has delivered a drastic improvement in learning and results for 23,000 students at 56 Catholic schools in the ACT and Goulburn, based on the NAPLAN results for nearly 10,000 schools, which are made public today. And joining us to discuss this very encouraging educational turnaround is Director of Catholic Education for the Archdiocese of Canberra and Goulburn, Ross Fox. Ross, fantastic to have you on the program. Thank you for joining us. So can you tell us, before we get into the meat of the interview, what is the direct instruction method and how is it different to how school kids have been taught in recent years?
In the last decades, Daisy, there's been a priority for students to discover things by themselves, sometimes called the inquiry method. So often this entailed starting with a question, only following students' interests, structuring acquisition of knowledge and learning through what students were interested in, what they wanted to ask. Now, we've thought long and hard about how children actually learn best. The reality is, for novice learners who don't know very much, the most efficient way to acquire new knowledge is to be told directly and explicitly what you need to learn. You need to do it in small bite-sized chunks that you can take in, that you can achieve mastery in, and then use that knowledge and skill and that fluency or automaticity to progress to the next level of understanding. Perhaps an easy way to think about it is if you go and watch a child being taught to learn to swim, or in fact almost any sport, children acquire knowledge about how to play really well through having the skills demonstrated, through practicing them in small bite-sized chunks and getting better at better. That's how we want to approach and how we have been approaching knowledge of literacy skills, mathematics, times tables, knowledge that every student needs to understand in order to apply them really quickly and easily to new and novel problems. So really, explicit instruction is the simple idea that if you want a child to know something, the most efficient and easy way to help them to get to know that is to tell them really directly what you want them to know and give them lots of opportunities to revisit in exciting, engaging ways so that they can really get that knowledge into their long-term memory and have it at their immediate disposal in the future to apply in new and interesting circumstances.
It certainly sounds like the obvious way to educate children, absolutely. So tell me, what inspired these Catholic schools to take up direct instruction?
Well, I began as Director of Catholic Education, leading 56 schools, almost 23,000 students 8 years ago. And what I saw when I went round and visited the teachers in many of the 1,000 classrooms in our schools was that there was no lack of dedication, no lack of professionalism. There was no lack of interest in seeing students learn. There was a huge amount of effort and almost nothing to show for it in terms of student results. I had the disturbing experience where I met with a parent and they told me how wonderful our school was that their child was at, how welcoming, how inclusive, how caring, and they finished the conversation by saying it's a real pity about the academic results. For me, that was a wake-up call because it wasn't that we didn't have dedicated teachers, it was that our practice in the classroom wasn't responding to how children needed to learn, needed to be assisted in their learning. We were proudly some time ago an inquiry system. So we started with questions, we followed student interests. We can still do that, but we do it with clear expectations about what students need to learn. So really it was an acknowledgement. A large part of the education system I work in and lead is based in Canberra. Canberra is a beautiful place, incredibly advantaged. Really, there's nothing that we want for in terms of educational resources. So we should set our sights very high. We should aspire to be one of the leading education systems in Australia, if not the world. And it wasn't for lack of effort by the teachers. So it really got me thinking, asking questions, working with my colleagues to work out what we would need to do, how we would need to approach learning in the classroom, how we would need to support teachers to provide great learning experiences across our classrooms and set our aspirations really high for every student and their achievement.
And what kind of results has reverting to direct instruction yielded so far?
Well, there's many results. The NAPLAN results out today show that of the top 20 schools identified by the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority as making a difference in the ACT, Catholic education has 13 of those, or 65%. We've got less than 25% of the schools in the ACT. So it's an incredible result to have our teachers' efforts recognised. We've got a school in country New South Wales, which apparently is in the top 50 schools in New South Wales. We're literally thousands of schools, and it's making a difference in a country town. So we've seen lots of very promising improvements. Almost literally, we've thought, teachers have said to me they wouldn't have expected our students to achieve what they're now achieving if you'd asked them 5 years ago. We've provided curriculum supports, higher expectations, richer vocabulary, faster paced lessons. All of these things are components of great teaching, and the students are just blossoming in their knowledge, their skills and ability.
It really is fantastic news. I mean, I've kept an eye on school results over the last few years, and it's really been quite alarming, the decline that's gone on. And look, this is how students used to learn, wasn't it? You know, direct instruction was sort of the way of the classroom, and then that was sort of abandoned for this other approach. Why do you think direct instruction was abandoned?
Well, one of the human failings is a obsession with novelty. We all want new, different things. Education has been an area where we've been really interested in what was new, what was innovative, and sometimes that has led us perhaps to discard what was working, what was effective, for something that's less well-defined and perhaps ineffective. So there's been some very attractive international education commentators, philosophers talking about ways to approach student learning, and they've been very influential in determining a priority for skills, a de-emphasis on knowledge, an idea that the most valuable learning for students is things that they discover for themselves. This all might work in an idealised environment, but the reality is we've got to follow the most effective, most efficient use of time for our teachers and our students. We've got to make teaching sustainable. We've got to make it as easy as possible to be a great teacher. And that's what we've been focused on, because every teacher I know is absolutely sees teaching as a vocation where they want to see students learn. And what we're doing is providing great professional learning so that teachers are incredibly effective in supporting that learning to occur with things like explicit instruction as a default assumption.
I mean, it's hugely commendable what you've done. Honestly, so commendable. And in fact, Catholic schools are actually making a few strides recently. I'd love your opinion on this. If we're to focus north to Queensland, Brisbane Catholic education claims to be the first kindergarten to year 12 education system in the world to have signed up to the Vatican's Rome Call on AI ethics, which was endorsed last year by the Pope himself. Now, Brisbane Catholic Education, they've designed their own custom-built Catholic chatbot. They've rolled it out across 146 schools, and the chatbot is grounded in Catholic teaching and theology. I mean, Ross, this is a very good way to get around the often very un-Catholic infused chatbots that are floating around, isn't it?
Well, potentially. I think artificial intelligence has huge potential to lift productivity, to reduce work. What we don't want it to do is replace thinking. True. We don't want it to replace the expectation that students will have a vast amount of knowledge to draw on, to be creative, to think, to use artificial intelligence, to use chatbots. So I think this is an interesting development. I think that the Vatican and the Catholic Church has been literally global leaders on trying to understand what ethical use of artificial intelligence looks like. I think it sounds like the Brisbane Catholic Education Initiative will be an important one to see how we can apply it to the benefit of teachers and students in schools. I think given we've just gone through in recent days a ban on social media for under 16s, and that's not without controversy in some areas, but there's a growing reality that not all technology is great for children in terms of their learning, their brain development, their socialisation, their mental health. And so we should very cautiously look at the use of artificial intelligence. Education, one of its core purposes should be developing vast bodies of knowledge within students' understanding, but it also should be deepening humanity. And so we need to really understand how artificial intelligence, how chatbots like that Brisbane Catholic Education has launched is going to deepen humanity, deepen human relationships, grow the sort of people that we're proud to have in our community, that we're proud for our children to be, proud to be citizens in Australia, if not the world.
Very well said, Ross. I'm always a little bit wary of artificial intelligence myself. I think it can be good to complement human knowledge, but certainly shouldn't be a replacement for it. Ross Fox, it's been so terrific to have you on the program. Congratulations with all your fantastic work with the school results and with direct instruction. Hopefully the public education system follows suit. All the best, and I hope we can chat again soon.
Thank you very much, Daisy. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that's all we have time for this evening on the Daisy Cousens Show. And of course, as always, I hope you enjoyed watching the program as much as I enjoyed hosting it. Thank you so much to my excellent guests and to all the equally excellent people behind the scenes who make this program possible. Coming up next, everyone, is Chris Smith tonight. Good night, world. I'll see you tomorrow.